So here's a question that I can't stop thinking about. Why do local governments keep handing out big deals to defense contractors even when the jobs just don't seem to add up? I'm Lacey Healy, and here at Inkstick Media, we've been looking into that puzzle with a little help from our journalist, Taylor Barnes.
I'm a field reporter here at Inkstick Media, and I cover the people and places tied up in the soon-to-be $1 trillion Pentagon budget, i.e. the defense budget.
And last time you were on the show, you weren't at Inkstick Media, and now you are. That's so exciting.
Absolutely.
Taylor found that over the past 40-ish years, private defense contracting has shed about 2 million jobs, leaving the industry at just a third of the number of workers that it had during the Reagan era. But the way that local governments think about the industry, it just doesn't reflect that.
To help celebrate the ribbon cutting of the new Lockheed Martin facility. The new site is an $18 million investment with a Black Hawk mission simulator.
Boeing leadership cut the ribbon today on its new expanded 9,000 square foot electronic center of excellence.
Lockheed Martin's Huntsville site is officially taking digital to a whole new level with its missile system integration lab ribbon cutting held today.
The facility is just outside of Redstone Arsenal and will be home to over 1,000 employees.
What I find is that the contractors very happily will sort of put out their press releases, put out their ribbon cutting photos alongside local officials, proclaiming sort of a headline number of jobs. That said, if you read the fine print, there are ways to not create so many jobs, but nonetheless get the tax break, i.e. in buying more machinery, more investment, basically. County officials will tell you, well, we like that because we can tax machinery as property. But then my question was always, but you're giving them like 20 years worth of tax breaks.
It's a pattern that we've seen from Ohio to North Carolina. Companies promise local communities huge job numbers with big salaries, often throwing in a few temporary workers to pad the numbers. But even without that pad, these deals aren't always what politicians and companies claim. We got a hold of public records about a new RTX plant in North Carolina, for example, that makes F-35 engine parts. And it turns out that in the early years of the project, they'd only created about half as many jobs as they said that they would. But a loophole let them claim the full subsidy anyway. Taylor's theory?
I sometimes wonder if the state examples who are doing the negotiating have such a limited understanding of what they're negotiating with that they may not even know.
When Taylor started looking at Northrop Grumman's intercontinental ballistic missile facility in Utah, that's exactly what she saw. She heard that Northrop Grumman was taking advantage of right-to-work laws in the state to undercut union labor as it built this plant. So she went in to check it out. And what she found was that many state officials seemed to have no idea what they were even playing with. At one point, Utah's top negotiator for the deals called the ICBMs a form of missile defense, like they were the same thing as the Patriot batteries that we're sending to Ukraine to shoot down bombs.
Which is 100% inaccurate. It is the actual weapon. It's not shooting down an incoming weapon.
Or listen to this. It's from a meeting over whether to subsidize the factory. Here's Utah State Senate President J. Stewart Adams.
I met us at the Gaza Strip. We actually sat on the border, saw the automatic machine guns to protect Israel. The next day we came back to Tel Aviv. That evening, they actually took out one of the Taliban operatives that they wanted in the Gaza Strip.
Except the Taliban, which runs Afghanistan, has never been much involved in the Gaza Strip.
They decided to retaliate. They only shot 500 missiles at Israel. They normally don't target Tel Aviv, but they did.
Again, not the Taliban. But it was probably pretty scary to be in Tel Aviv that day. And that's what led to what Adams said next.
This is not a theoretical threat. This is not a possible threat. What is happening here goes way beyond economic development, that it goes to the defense of this country and the freedoms we love.
An ICBM, or intercontinental ballistic missile, is used to deliver a big bomb across a long distance, usually a nuclear weapon. It's definitely not meant to be used to take down a decentralized guerrilla group next door.
But this vague feeling of fear and this vague feeling of there are bad people out there then allowed him to give his big thumbs up to tax breaks for Northrop Grumman.
We're not just being pedants here. The point is that a lack of awareness about the inner workings of defense policy led Utah's leadership to leave money on the table.
And the official version of the story is when a company is looking to relocate or to expand, it will go around the country and say, oh, cities, towns, localities, I would like to set up a new factory or expand a factory, whatever, whatnot. What can you offer me in exchange if I choose your town to bring my jobs and my investment?
But in reality, many companies know exactly where they want to go. Like for building these missiles in Utah. People have been working on ICBMs at this exact site since the 50s. The design, the manufacturing, the testing, it's already set up.
Because there's only so many places you can blow up stuff in the desert.
But that's not the only problem. Because this lack of knowledge about the military industry that they were stumping for wasn't just leaving Utahns with a bad deal. It was also really, really bad for reporting. Because when we tried to answer that first question, why are local governments giving out all of these subsidies to defense contractors anyway? And what happens after they do? We found ourselves on a hell of a ride. This is Things That Go Boom.
Every day, we're bombarded with sound bites, social media posts, and headlines that barely scratch the surface. What if instead of taking in all that noise, we took a breath and took time to deeply understand our world? I'm Chris Boyd, host of Think. That is what we do every day on the show when I talk with guests about scientific discoveries, political issues, and more to learn why things are the way they are. Join us. Who knows what you might learn?
From Zuckerman Spader. For 5 decades, Zuckerman Spader has been a leading litigation firm trusted by in-house and outside counsel, businesses, and individuals. With offices in Washington, Baltimore, New York, and Tampa, Zuckerman Spader serves clients throughout the country and around the world in high-stakes disputes, enforcement matters, investigations, and at trial. When the lawyer you choose matters most. Online at Zuckerman.com. This show is supported by Odoo. When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
Just outside the thin air and clear skies of Promontory, Utah, in a stretch of flat land nestled between the mountains, is what Northrop Grumman calls the Rocket Ranch, or its Innovation Systems Campus. 800 buildings dotted through nearly 20,000 acres of mountain and desert. Outside a remote rocket test facility, engineers hide out in bunkers to watch missiles explode and recalibrate their work. 10 miles north at the Promontory North Plant, workers put the pieces together for what will become over 600 surface-to-air vehicles for nuclear bombs. Bombs that will eventually tuck into silos, cozy underground in the American heartland, which just might bait our adversaries to bomb Wyoming first instead of New York or LA if we ever faced an all-out nuclear war. Missiles have been part of Promontory's story ever since 1956, when Northrop's predecessor first started the Rocket Ranch and built the first missile plant out here around the dunes and the mountains. But despite the long history, there's still quite a lot of secrecy.
Take a look at this scene coming out of Box Elder County.
Yeah, the sheriff's office says an explosion occurred at the Northrop Grumman facility at Promontory Point. They say the building is a total loss.
It was around 7:30 a.m. Wednesday morning, and I heard a loud boom. My whole house shook.
At least 2 public officials that I spoke with today said they have been asked by Northrop Grumman not to make any comments about what occurred here today.
Just this April, a major explosion occurred at one of the buildings on campus.
Apparently there's another building right next to the one that's on fire, and nobody's done anything to start putting a fire out yet. Ammonia on scene. This could be really good or really bad. If they don't do anything, that second building's going to go.
It's going to be a really, really big explosion.
It's going to be a very bad day.
County sheriffs had to fight their way in, getting told that the area was classified. And that secrecy extends to state subsidies. When Taylor asked Utah for the details of the state subsidies agreement with Northrop Grumman for the first and second stage of building the ICBM, Utah state government seemed surprised. They did send her something back, but they redacted a lot.
All they were giving me was boilerplate language. And I even pointed out things. I was like, wait, the total amount of tax break, like you put this in your press release, like that part's not much of a secret.
What she wanted was the table that spelled out how many jobs Northrop Grumman was supposed to create with the ICBM project and at what salary in order to get its tax breaks. Utah officials said that they would not be sharing that. So we lawyered up, or we tried.
I approached a law firm in Utah that had a public records practice, and they said, pardon us, but we have a conflict of interest. We also represent Northrop Grumman elsewhere in our practice. So I said, this is not surprising if you are a large law firm in Utah. So I had to start flying solo.
She started asking around for contacts for attorneys who would be game for suing the world's largest nuclear weapons contractor and the Utah state government. And thankfully, several were interested. But getting the company and state government on record has made it clear just how little deep understanding of foreign policy is driving decision makers.
We've had mediation with them. We have been before the State Records Committee with them. The State Records Committee was pretty bonkers. When we got there was a whole slate of hearings. Someone who was incarcerated called in wanting to get access to, I believe, camera images of something that had happened at his prison. There was someone seeking police records. And then we come in seeking, records about intercontinental ballistic missiles. And I think the Records Committee was just a little blown away.
Here's one of our lawyers, Tony Kay, at the meeting.
The statute says that you can't protect final contract, then you can't protect the final contract. And they should have known that going in.
Local public records law said that these economic development contracts are to be made public. I thought this would be plain English reading of the law.
Utah's Assistant Attorney General thought differently. He said that private tax and workforce employment records are not subject to public disclosure, and that even though salary ranges and job postings for Northrop Grumman are all over its online job board, that the aggregate plan for jobs year by year was a strategic trade secret.
Competitors of Northrop Grumman watch this kind of information.
And he didn't mean just Lockheed Martin and Raytheon.
Russia and China are probably watching very closely what Northrop Grumman is doing. I guarantee they are.
I found this amusingly hyperbolic, and I thought, surely the committee will see through this. I told a local reporter friend about that afterward and how I found it so amusing. And the reporter friend said, no, Taylor, here in Utah, that's going to go really far. You're going to lose. And then they unanimously voted against us.
The phrase national security can do a lot when it comes to dodging transparency, even if it doesn't make sense.
When in my biggest stretch of imagination, does knowing that the plant may be in this year, according to a contract that's now 4 years old, may be employing 2,000 people as opposed to 1,000 people at its 6 locations or whatever it is across Utah, does that somehow inform how many bombs you need in order to kill everyone at those plants and therefore take out the United States nuclear weapons production capacity? It is bonkers.
When I started working in nuclear and foreign policy in D.C. almost 20 years ago now, I kind of thought this was going to be what it says on the tin. But the more time I've spent in this town, the more I've found that the levers of power are not only where you think they'll be. Taylor's story was supposed to be a story about military contracts. But now it was also a story about public records agencies tucked away in the Mountain West playing hide the ball. And about this 7-person records committee in Taylorsville, Utah. About how this committee, which was supposed to give regular people and reporters a fair shake at information, became staffed with a former defense contractor, before it was just disbanded entirely and replaced with an attorney who reports to the governor. It became a story about your right to know.
I feel like our experience reporting in Northrop Grumman in Utah points to, I just think, sort of how underreported this area is, which is to say, both the company and the state government seem to have been really surprised that we've been coming after them and that we have been suing for their records and that we continue to do this watchdog journalism. For example, earlier this year, we found out that a Republican lawmaker in the Utah legislature introduced a bill that strongly appeared to target us. And sort of backstory on that was that at one point in this legal fight for these public records, due to a court filing mishap, my attorneys inadvertently received the full unredacted document that we are seeking and that we were in this prolonged legal battle to get a copy of. After much hullabaloo, it was my own attorneys that alerted the government that I believe you did not intend to upload this to our court file.
Our attorneys did not pass this document along to us. Their ethics rules preclude that.
After that, we noticed that in the beginning of the legislative session in Utah this year that this Republican state lawmaker introduced this amendment to public records law that literally criminalized somebody who, quote unquote, inadvertently received a government record that the government intended to be protected in some form and then made, quote unquote, inappropriate use of it. Like, you can see the wild First Amendment issues right here. Does that mean if I published it and you decide later you didn't like it, can you just change your mind and describe that, say it was inadvertent and inappropriate?
The amendment didn't pass, but it did remind us. Our approach to war and peace isn't just something that happens in the Pentagon. It's hushed up by a state lawmaker's failed anti-transparency legislation. It's decided by county commissioners, municipal water regulations, building bylaws, and economic development contracts. That can sound overwhelming, but it's actually something that's helped Taylor with her work, because it means she's not alone.
So, for example, I was told by one watchdog that communities that were opposed to Amazon HQ2 coming to their towns would submit a flurry of public records requests and get denied, and told exactly what I was told in Utah, which is we can't give that to you because we have signed a non-disclosure agreement with the company. So then what those Amazon HQ2 watchdog groups started doing is okay, well, that non-disclosure agreement is also a public record, and I have that. And they started getting it. So I went and requested the Utah state government's NDA with Northrop Grumman, had a bit of a bizarre experience in which they first claimed they couldn't find it, despite citing it for me as the reason that they couldn't give me the records. Then finally they produced one. The NDA was merely a document that stated what state law was, which all of us can look up online all day long.
Asking for the NDA was a pretty hot tip, but in this case, it was also a lot of work for kind of a dud. And these days, doing that kind of watchdogging, it feels more and more lonely. And not just when we report on Utah.
So Anduril in Ohio, back in, I think, January or February, with a big splash, ribbon cutting ceremony, yada, put out, an announcement along with the governor that it was creating the absolute largest job creation project in Ohio history with 4,000 jobs at this drone autonomous weapons plant.
This is a new defense tech company whose whole shtick is automated lean factories and fewer people with jobs. The state had committed $500 million in subsidies.
Big splash on the front page of the Columbus Dispatch, Ohio lands drones, 4,000 jobs. The governor made a meme, a social media little post for easy sharing about how this was the largest job creation project in history. And then what's happened? That's been 6 months ago. And I have asked every single month for the actual economic development contract that spells out the terms of that. And I'm told it just doesn't exist yet. It's not even ready. When you actually try to get the paper trail for these job creation claims, that's when officials and the companies ultimately clam up.
So they're saying 4,000, but at this point, they haven't even done the work to calculate the numbers.
There is nothing on paper to actually spell that out right now. There is no contract that spells that out.
After I spoke with Taylor, a contract was indeed executed. But as of late July, the private nonprofit that administers corporate subsidies in Ohio won't let us see it. Something it's able to avoid in this case because it's not a government agency. And this constant fight for information is compounded by something else that Taylor's noticed.
On the local level, you will so very, very rarely ever see something along the lines of local media adding any context, which I understand. You have to sort of find the paper trail, feel confident, fluent in these topics. But you'll see the Lockheed Martin plant described as an aircraft plant. You may even see it described as, contributing to national defense. You won't see it say, the C-130, which has been used to transport weapons to Israel, or, the F-35, which the Israeli military has used to bomb Gaza. You don't see the media being able to draw out the actual use of those products in the field.
So we called up an expert in media and the military about this. We thought we'd hear the usual stories. Under-resourced newsrooms, adversarial governments, and we did hear a little bit of that. But she also told us that the relationship between our media systems and the military is actually pretty cozy. And it has been for a long time. That's after the break. In 2014, the Washington Post went from local to national. They made a huge push on digital subscriptions and refocused as the major competitor to the New York Times. This was around the same time the internet ads took over classified ads, killing a major source of income for newspapers. And it matters because it's part of a bigger picture on the ground today. Local news, the guys that follow up monthly on OSHA updates in a specific nuclear cleanup site or unsafe lead paint removal at a specific shipyard. They're getting slammed by economic, social, and technical disruptions every day, which means there's less capacity for high-quality local reporting. National outlets might write a one-off story about how problems at a factory represent Middle America's cultural anxieties, but they probably won't follow every update in a union drive. And those national outfits, they have their own problems. A year before the Post went national, it had been bought by Jeff Bezos in 2013. And at the time, he kind of gave the impression that he'd stay out of the way. He wasn't there to push his own perspective. He said that he wanted to make money, and he thought independent adversarial journalism might do that. And maybe he believed that. Maybe he didn't. But years later, after the start of Trump's second term,
Jeff Bezos wants to change things at the Washington Post's opinion section,
saying it's now going to focus on what he calls two pillars: personal liberties and free markets.
It also prompted the resignation of the outlet's opinion editor, David Shipley. Bezos said in a post on X that the new topics are right for America, and he believes it will fill a void in the news market.
Bezos was putting his interests ahead of what analysts and columnists might want to write. And those interests blatantly include business deals with the U.S. government.
A number of different media parent corporations have themselves defense contracts.
Mary Vavris is a professor at the University of Minnesota who studies gender, the military, and the media.
You've got Jeff Bezos owning the Washington Post with Blue Origin and other kinds of defense contracts with the Defense Department. So they don't necessarily have to be equipment and weaponry, but they can be all kinds of different things that the Department of Defense needs.
Amazon has billions of dollars in cloud computing contracts with the federal government, including the CIA, DoD, and NSA. And in his crossover between media, defense, and tech industries, Jeff Bezos is not alone.
You have Elon Musk with owning X, formerly Twitter, formerly a really good site.
R.I.P.
Yeah, R.I.P. is right. You know, having Starlink satellite contracts, having SpaceX missiles help to sway things so that the narrative looks like whatever the party in control. Right now, the party in control is very clear about what its needs are.
Public media also isn't immune. One of NPR's top sponsors is General Motors, which has a defense subsidiary. But even when ownership, advertising, or sponsorship connections are unmissable, journalists in big shops often think of ourselves as independent actors, far away from high-level business decisions, out mucking around and exposing the truth at all costs while some suit crunches the numbers. Mary argues that the reality is more complicated.
NBC used to be a subsidiary of one of the world's largest defense contractors, General Electric. The television news that NBC was featuring during the run-up to the war in Iraq had us following anchors as they went on aircraft carriers. And look, this is going to take them to the Gulf. And look at this wonderful cockpit. It's so high tech. And in that case, there was a direct benefit to General Electric that NBC kind of tout its equipment.
There's a more recent incident that also sticks in her mind.
Paramount deciding that in order for them to pursue an acquisition merger with Skydance Media, they need to settle with the Trump administration a really bogus, specious lawsuit about whether 60 Minutes had treated Trump unfairly in an interview by editing Kamala Harris's interview somehow. So Paramount just settled that, even though 60 Minutes correspondents were saying, please don't do this. It suggests that we did something wrong, and we know we did not.
Stephen Colbert had his own words for this on The Late Show.
This kind of complicated financial settlement with a sitting government official has a technical name in legal circles. It's big fat bribe.
But then 5 days later,
I found out just last night, next year, will be our last season. The network will be ending The Late Show in May.
So these much higher level decisions about mergers and acquisitions, which have been numerous, voluminous even since the mid-1980s, those are big decisions. So you have to toe the line in order to curry favor with whatever presidential administration, whatever FCC chair, and their particular ideas about how the media system should look.
Mary doesn't like to blame the reporters and producers doing this work every day, but how we think about the job does play a role. First, there's the question of access. Obviously, when the White House kicked out the AP for not renaming the Gulf of Mexico, that was splashy. But this access can also be more subtle. Do you ever notice how every White House press secretary calls the Corps by their first name? National security reporters tend to think of ourselves as cultivating sources deep inside state agencies and take less note of the way that those sources are actually cultivating us, making us feel like we have insider knowledge and feeding us information anonymously. We usually think of this information as the kind of leak that can get a staffer in trouble, but it can also be used to avoid accountability as our sources shape the narrative. And then there's who gets invited on the news.
In the run-up to the war in Iraq in 2002 and 2003, a study showed that there were almost 75% of the stories that appeared on broadcast and cable news about the war were calling on pro-war voices.
So this isn't just both sidesism or...
It's one-sidism.
You'll also see a lot of pro-war voices on TV news today. And a lot of them are retired military generals who are also sitting on the boards of defense contractors.
But they also have these gigs as the war experts. There are just blatant conflicts of interest in their commentary and in their viewpoints.
Those conflicts don't usually end up beside their name on the little TV chyrons. They just see someone who's in the military, right? Obviously, you're speaking from personal experience, lived experience. Like, you must be the guy to go to, right?
Barry Caffrey, yeah, I know. Stanley McChrystal. Right, all these guys who have a lot of military credibility, but who also are benefiting tremendously from sitting on the boards of directors of these defense contractors.
Whether it's from the Department of Defense or military contractors, journalists and the public are also bombarded with publicity campaigns and language about just how fun and exciting the latest new weapons are. Some scholars call this techno-fetishism. Just look at the coverage of the recent U.S. attack on Iran with our bunker buster bombs.
The 30,000-pound bomb can penetrate deep into rock.
The bunker buster has a thick, hard shell designed to withstand the impacts of the ground and plunge to the depths it needs to reach.
Now, we've seen some satellite imagery that shows what looked to be puncture marks. We know that the president was happy with it.
3 B-2 bombers were involved in the strikes tonight because each B-2 bomber can only carry 2 of those 15-ton bunker-busting bombs.
The news becomes about the weapon and whether it's effective and whether, what degree of effectiveness it possesses rather than what the hell are we doing bombing Iran, right? So this love story about these weapons becomes a distraction from what they're being used for and how they're being discussed. And most often, like we saw in the bombs, they aren't nearly as effective as they're supposed to be. They put minor dents in the bunkers, apparently, but they didn't bust those bunkers.
It's something that Taylor sees, too, in the communities where she reports.
There's a valorization of the fact that we're in, quote-unquote, the high-tech industry, high-tech being, one way to describe the weapons industry. For example, in Utah, there was a local museum that sent me their exhibit in Brigham City, which is a city near the final assembly plant in Utah's West Desert for the new intercontinental ballistic missile. The name of the exhibit is From Rural to Rockets, about how this, rural desert town became the focal point, the main industrial point for the high-tech industry, i.e. missiles and rockets. And the exhibit was actually pretty wonderful. That said, I thought it really did speak to sort of at the local level how there can be a sort of dazzlement over these employers.
And I told Mary Vavris, I even see this happen with reporters for the military trade press. Defense Newses or Defense Ones or Breaking Defenses of the world.
Yeah.
And you may not see it written in the same way on the site, but if you follow those people on social media, you see them being taken on those sort of, those fancy rides on the airplanes and trips out to the bases.
I'm so glad you said that, because we need to consider all these media together. I used to get interstitial ads on Twitter for war material. It was the craziest thing. I would get something from Northrop Grumman, from Lockheed about a new fighter jet, or about these new terrestrial vehicles that were armored and could do all kinds of things if I clicked on the video, which I did because I couldn't believe I was being advertised to in this way.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm not somebody who could buy a bolt from any one of these things, but the idea was to condition me ideologically to, I think, believe that these were the latest and greatest ways we could fight wars.
All that is kind of why we're doing this. Lately, Taylor has been co-publishing with the Salt Lake City Weekly, and they've been helping us reach a wide audience in Utah. They're the largest circulation weekly in the state. Northrop Grumman workers have actually reached out to us after seeing these stories in the paper. But meanwhile, the state is also getting better at hiding the ball.
We still haven't gotten the old original contract to subsidize Northrop Grumman in Utah. We have not gotten the performance reports of whether they are actually, meeting the terms of their deal, with the terms of which we can't see.
And last year, the Economic Development Corporation of Utah started making reference to a contract with a similar name to the one that Northrop Grumman's had when it was in drafts.
Simply a new round of subsidies for Northrop Grumman in Utah. And very curiously, in this contract, rather than have an attachment that is completely redacted, which is what they did to us for the first time, there's a strange line at the top of the contract which says, this contract makes reference to, but does not attach, the following documents: projected job creation and salary requirements. So it's just simply not there.
Oh, and at the same time, they hired a local lobbyist from the agency that administers the subsidies, the same agency that we're suing for records. So we've gone from redactions to rewriting the rules to, in some cases, nothing at all. But if this journey's taught us anything, it's that the problem here isn't just a failure of oversight. It's about power. Who understands how the system works, who doesn't, and who's willing to keep asking questions anyway. This isn't just a story about missiles or subsidies or even secrecy. It's a story about how war and peace are shaped in boardrooms, committee meetings, and local newsrooms, and about how easily the truth gets buried unless someone like Taylor is willing to dig it up. So this season on Things That Go Boom, we're following the money and the missiles all the way to the places that most people won't look. Because if power is more local than we thought, and maybe change is too. Next time on the show, we head to Scottsdale.
We are being asked to cancel an election called by the people of Scottsdale. It's our job as this chamber to protect voters' rights to express that view once an election's been called. You might think changing and canceling an election once it's been called is the stuff of banana republics and it is beneath the state of Arizona. I vote no.
Things That Go Boom is distributed by Inkstick Media and PRX. If you like what we do, you can feel free to leave us a nice review on your favorite podcast platform anytime. We won't mind at all. Or pop on over to our socials at Inkstick Media to say hi. This episode was produced by Katie Toth and me, and edited and assembled by Nikki Galtelin. The music for our show is written by Darian Schulman, and Robin Wise is our engineer. Thanks, as always, to the supporters and the foundations that make our work possible: the Carnegie Corporation of New York and Plowshares Fund, as well as Inkstick supporters, including the Column Foundation, Riva and David Logan Foundation, Craig Newmark Philanthropies, Prospect Hill Foundation, and the Jubitz Family Foundation. We'll see you all right back here in 2 weeks.
There is great reporting and great reporters out there, and their jobs are being made much more difficult by this overwhelming expectation that they can't be trusted, et cetera, et cetera. When I start to point out to people that this has been a public relations campaign to demean and diminish this really important industry, That starts conversations. It's not a simple talking point, though. It's not at all.